Hello and welcome everyone. I really hope that you can hear me and you've all you're in a good mood and came here to learn something about Active Directory best practices for all of you who are administrating it, probably protecting. I'm the guy on the right. My name is Andrey. I'm technical analyst for Veeam product strategy. And today I'm here with the rock star of Active Directory. Sander, would you like to say a couple of words about yourself?
A couple of words about myself.
Yep.
I just said it. Oh, wow. Yeah. No. I don't feel like I'm a rock star myself. I just do a lot with Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. And I see a lot of environments where Active Directory admins make their lives harder themselves. And I'm like, why would you do such a thing? So, yeah, when you approached me and said, you know what, let's do a webinar on best practices for managing Active Directory and backing up, and of course, restoring Active Directory. Yes, of course. Yes, let's do this.
All right. Then that's us. We're going to entertain you for the next 45, 40, probably an hour. We'll see about that. And a couple of rules before we actually get started. A couple of things. So you're automatically muted. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach us out via chat window. You can just click there and you can ask us any questions. So we'll have a couple of stops in between. We'll try to answer them, or we have a dedicated time at the end of the session to actually talk to you about. And yes, we're going to share the recording of the session. We're going to share the slides because this is something that people are usually asking about. And beside of that, there is another thing that we have a poll. We were thinking about entertaining you guys, and then I'm going to just go to polls and going to launch it right now. So the thing is that we really wanted to ask you about your experience with the Active Directory and your current environment right now. So what's your forest functional level at the moment? There are a couple of answers you can select, and meanwhile, once we have enough data, I'm going to share it. But then just take, I don't know, like 10 seconds and answer it. And then we're going to collect and present it right away. With that in mind,
Yes, and of course,
yeah?
panelists can't vote. Panelists can't vote, unfortunately. So if anyone would be so kind to select I just reverted back to the Windows Server 2008-02 force functional level, actually. For me, that would be great fun. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have 56%, 57% of people voted. That's actually awesome. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to click next and present the agenda that is going to happen for the next hour. So I'm going to hand it over to Sander, and he will talk a lot about the kind of things that are usually considered to be best practices for the Active Directory, and things including protecting the expiring passwords or protected users group and using the Active Directory recycle bin and all that. He has a lot of information, so just brace yourself. And then we're going to actually switch back to myself, and kind of take a look at Veeam and Veeam backup and replication and Veeam agent and how they are going to actually to help you with your day-to-day duties related to Active Directory. And like I said before, by the end of the session, we're planning to do the Q&A round.
Yeah, so let's look at the poll results, AZ. Let's see what they've got.
I'm like, do I have to? Yeah, I can share the results right now. But then essentially, oh, that's really interesting.
Yep.
So what do you think about those 9% of people who voted for Windows Server 2019?
I think that's ambitious. Yes, especially since there is no Windows Server 2019 domain function level or forest function level, but of course, nothing but the latest and greatest for organizations. But yeah, so it's good to see that most people are in 2012, 2012 R2 or 2016. And of course, if you're still on 2003, 2008 or 2002, let's up that level, let's raise that level towards something that you might actually need for some of the functionality that we are going to talk about. And as AZ already pointed out, this is our agenda for today. We've got some information for you that will make your life as an Active Directory administrator easy. And of course, I'll show you what the good things are about the Active Directory recycle bin. And Andrey will actually expand on that and tell you, well, you know what? Sounds great, but here's Veeam backup and replication, and we can actually do more. And of course, we'll end up with questions and answers. So GoToWebinar has questions built in. We've got answers built in. And if you ask us some questions, we'll try and answer them. But let's get started. And I'll ask AZ to give me some.
I haven't shared. Okay,
slides.
yeah, I'm going to, yeah.
And then
go ahead.
Then I can click, I guess. I can. And here we go. Because I'm going to start with protecting, and well, we would want to have automatically expiring passwords, but I think we're mostly condemned to expiring passwords ourselves if we don't take advantage of most of the other things. And this is something that is close to my heart, because I see loads and loads of organizations that have user accounts, have service accounts, have a curb TGG account even, that hasn't had their password changed for the last 5 or 10 years. And this might be a true security risk. And there's a couple of new features in Active Directory that I want you to know that you can use to actually tackle this challenge. And the first one is fine-grained password and account lockout policies. So even if you have your users changing their passwords, for instance, every year, or if you use the default settings every 42 days, you might want your privileged accounts, so your Active Directory accounts, for instance, to have passwords that expire more often, so that admins need to change their passwords more often. And this way, you can actually differentiate between your normal users, the mere mortals in your Active Directory, and of course your admins and those responsible for, well, at least 9% for the latest and greatest in your organization. And then you can actually have your users change their password, I don't know, every year, which seems to be the new norm, and have admins still change their password every 30 days. Now, don't get me wrong, this is something that I feel is a best practice. But in the past, with Active Directory, what we saw is that if you want to differentiate between password and account lockout policies, until Windows Server 2008, you actually had to create a different Active Directory domain with, well, that's the other best practice, with at least 2 domain controllers. Now you have to manage 2 more domain controllers just because you want to differentiate between 2 groups in your organization in terms of password and account lockout policies. Well, that seems a bit dumb. So Microsoft has introduced in Windows Server 2008 the fine-grained password and account lockout policies. And we've been able to do stuff with those on the command line since Windows Server 2008. Through PowerShell, but there's actually a graphical user interface available since Windows Server 2012, and I'd like to show you that. But you know what, AZ? Can we shift to the demo environment?
Right away.
Right away. So I have a domain controller right here for, you can see it right here, for the domain that AZ and I have come up with for this webinar. It's IT Bros, because that's how I feel with AZ. And this is actually the Active Directory users and computers that most organizational admins use. And I'm just gonna enable, let's see, advanced features right here. And in system, what we're seeing is that there's password policies right here. But if I go here and I click, then there's not really something that I can do. And that's because this feature is not something that you can use in your familiar Active Directory users and computers MMC snap-in, but you can only use it in Active Directory Administrative Center. So here I've switched to the Active Directory Administrative Center, and I'm just going to click here on password settings, container, and now I have the option to create a new password setting. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to give it a meaningful name, something like that, and a precedence, something that makes sense. And now I'm going to say, you know what? I want people to change their password every 30 days. For instance, for admins. And then I'm going to click on OK right here and create it. Now, what's fun is that the Active Directory Administrative Center actually is a shell around PowerShell. So what you're seeing me do is create a new AD fine-grained password policy right there. And now if I click on it and I say, you know what, I want to make this apply to my domain admins or my enterprise admins or whatever, but let's click domain admins for this domain. Then now domain admins have to change their password every 30 days. So this is fun. This is very useful. It's not as fun for admins, of course, or other people that have to change their password more often, but at least it makes your Active Directory environment more secure. Now, AZ, if we switch back to the slides, I just want to give you some recommended practices on this. So the first thing you need to know is that lowest precedence provides priority. So the most important one is actually the fine-grained password and account lockout policy with a precedence of 1. So the way you can use it is, and this is something that we do if we onboard a new customer for our managed service, is we create fine-grained password policies for 30, 90, 180, and 365 days. And we actually give them that same precedence. So if I assign multiple policies to the same user or the same group, or the user gets different policies through different group membership, what happens is that the most restricting one will actually have the priority. And of course, if you have stricter account lockout settings, or if you have more passwords remembered or something like that, you give them a lower precedence to keep that model in shape. And of course, when you assign, you have to disable the password never expires on accounts, because if the password never expires option is enabled for a user, that user will never have to actually change the password. The password and account lockout policy won't do anything to help with that. So real-world recommendations right here in this webinar. Let's talk about a second tool. And let's talk about, I don't know why slides aren't moving. Let me try it this way. Here we go. Let's talk about the local administrator password solution. So this is not something that is built into Active Directory or built into Windows or built into whatever tool you're using today. You have to separately download it and install it and roll it out for it to work. But its magic works wonders for your security. And I actually had a consultancy job with an organization that had previously had some of their laptops stolen. And this was a high security environment, and they didn't have the local administrator password solution. So what they had was all laptops had the same local administrator password. So if someone would have nicked a laptop, then used a third-party tool to actually get to the password or crack the password, then he or she would have local administrator rights on all the laptops in that environment. Now, this is something that you certainly don't want. What you want is administrator passwords for all your devices that are different for all your devices, except for domain controllers, because domain controllers don't have local administrators. Domain controllers have an account for the domain admin, the built-in domain admin. And if you install the Labs client-side extensions on a domain controller, you would get very weird results. Now, the fact or the way that Labs works is through a client-side extension, and you just install the client-side extensions to all devices in scope, and then they will talk to Active Directory. Your Active Directory needs to be prepared for that, so there's a schema extension as well, and then all the devices by default will change the local administrator password every 30 days. And as an admin, if you need to get local administrator privileges, if you need to log on with that account, then all you have to do is start up the Labs UI, and you can install that on the domain controller without problems, and then just type in the device name, and you'll get the local administrator password for that device. Now, there's a couple of recommendations. So don't run the Labs client-side extension on domain controllers. As I said, that will become very vague, very fast, well, at least every 30 days. Do not use additional local admin passwords on domain joined devices. So as you spin up the group policy for Labs, it will actually ask you for the local administrator password that you want to password, the local account that you want to password to rotate for. Now, if you have multiple accounts on those devices, Labs can only work with one account. And if you have multiple accounts on the same device that have the same password for all the other devices, then you still have the same problem. So don't do that. And of course, if you are used to using group policy to set local administrator password for groups of devices, then Microsoft really wants you to know that this results in passwords being stored in sysvol. As a normal human being, we won't be able to actually read those passwords. Microsoft doesn't store them in clear text, but they are merely encoded. And there are certain PowerShell scripts available that will actually tell you which group policies contain which passwords for functionality like this. And every user is able to actually run those PowerShell scripts. So that truly undermines your security posture as an organization. Now that we've got Labs and the other passwords done, what you actually want to think about next is the group managed service accounts, because we can have service accounts in Active Directory that operate and work just like any other normal service account that you use to run a service, but then have it change its password every 30 days by default as well. And then if you really are interested in that, and most organizations are, you can actually limit the servers where the service account is actually able to provide its services. So it won't be able to log on interactively anywhere, which is what you want with a service account, but you can limit the scope of a group managed service account to just one server. And if you have the Windows Server 2008-02 domain functional level or up, then you will have automatic service principal name updates. So the service principal name is something that limits that group managed service account. And if you rename the server, for instance, then the group managed service account functionality may break. But if you have the Windows Server 2008-02 domain functional level or up, then Active Directory takes care of all that. So AZ, let's show it. Let's go to the demo environment and show them, because I've got some great managed service accounts in this Active Directory. And you know what? Let me first show you in users and computers, because they're here as well. I have to scroll up a bit, but here's the managed service accounts container. And here are some of my group managed service accounts. Now, I'm a lazy admin myself, so I didn't add a description, but let's look at one of those managed service accounts. And actually, let's right-click it and ask for its properties. And what you'll see is that there's not much use here for that group managed service account. What you actually want to do is go into the Active Directory Administrative Center, and here go look. And here you'll find the same tabs, but you can actually use new and then group managed service account to create them. Now these service principal names that I just talked to you about, let's look at that. So here's a group managed service account for ADFS, and its service principal name attribute actually tells it that it is only allowed to log on, or actually to run, a service on adfs.idbrowse.nl, the ADFS farm for this environment. So it can't be used to log on interactively anywhere, but you can ultimately run it to run services securely without having to wonder about how often you need to manually change the password, or how to actually do that, how not to break your services but still be secure. So AZ, let's switch back and let's talk about some other things that you can do as an admin to use Active Directory more easily. So the protected users and other protections are really good things that you can use, and the protected users group is something that you can use to secure the accounts in your Active Directory. The protected users group will actually limit some of the things that you can do with your account. So for instance, when you make an account a member of that protected users group, what happens is that now, and let's see what happens. I don't know what AZ is doing, but I wasn't clicking. So you got some great preview now on what we're going to talk about in the session. But for instance, what happens is now the TGG lifetime is limited to 4 hours instead of 10 hours. And the TGT renewal period, so the amount of time that you have to log on interactively again, if you don't end your session manually, is the same 4 hours instead of 7 days. And you will no longer be able to use NTLM and stuff like that in environments with the Windows Server 2012 R2 domain functional level. So if you want to take advantage of that, then please make sure that your Active Directory is going towards that domain functional level. Now there's a couple of tips that I want to give you. So your environment will have to run Windows Server 2008, Windows 8.1 and up, or Windows Server 2012 or 2 and up. And if you do not meet that requirement, you will not be able to log on with the user account that is a member of the protected users group anymore. You will just receive an error that says, you know what, you can't log on here because we're secure over here. Don't make service accounts, managed service account, or group managed service account members of the protected users group, because these accounts typically use Kerberos constrained delegation, and membership of the protected users group actually breaks delegation, because this is something that has some risks associated to them. The protections in the protected user group are non-configurable, so don't lock every admin out. Make sure that if you're testing with this, that you have at least one admin account that you don't make a member of the protected users group. And of course, we've got authentication policies and policy silos if we want to granularly provide the same protections as the protected users group, but not want to have all of them apply. And authentication policies and authentication policy silo will give you a way to actually more granularly target systems where you want the protections to apply, and you can have more granular settings, for instance, for the GGT lifetime and GGT renewal settings. And the authentication policies and policy silos can only be managed, of course, in the Active Directory Administrative Center and not in Active Directory users and groups, just like, well, basically all the things that I've been talking about until today. And now we get to the really interesting part, which is the Active Directory recycle bin. So before the Windows Server 2008.2 forced functional level, before you actually implemented the Active Directory recycle bin, what happens when you delete a user, it is actually in a deleted state and stripped of, well, for instance, every group membership and stuff like that. And Mark Krasinovich has had launched a tool, AD Restore, that you can use to restore those objects back. But the only thing you would actually restore is the security identifier for that user, but not its membership. And as Microsoft's recommended practices to, well, for most of things, use groups in your permissions structure, you would have your user back with the same security identifier, but not its membership to those groups with the security identifiers in the access control list and the access control entries in your permission structure. So you've got some things back, but not everything. So the way deletion works in Active Directory is when you delete a user, what happens is that it gets tombstoned. So as domain controllers communicate to each other and replicate to each other, they will need to have some objects that they can reference to actually replicate certain changes. So if user objects, and I've deliberately taken user objects here because this is what most organizations use the Active Directory recycle bin for, but you can also use it for organizational units and for devices as well. As you disable or as you delete a user object, it gets a special flag. So it gets all its attributes stripped, and it gets a special flag that says, you know what, this object is tombstoned. So as the domain controller replicates out, it can say, this is the object that I've tombstoned, please tombstone it yourself as well. And that will make sure that the object doesn't show up in your management tooling anymore, and it restricts signing up and signing in with those accounts. And of course, you can reanimate or restore them, but as you reanimate them, you will notice that you will have most attributes and group memberships missing. And each and every domain controller in your environment will respect the tombstone lifetime period, which is 60 days if you have a really old, good Active Directory environment, and 180 days if it was set up with Windows Server 2003 Service Pack 1 or Windows Server 2008. And after those 60 or 180 days, what will happen is that each domain controller individually will run the garbage collection process every 12 hours and actually remove the user from database. And that's when the user object is actually deleted. And then it's done. There's nothing we can do about it anymore. We can't reanimate it anymore, and we can't do anything with it anymore. So there's a 60 to 180 day period where you can reanimate objects in the old model, but it's painful and you don't get anything back or everything back. And with the Active Directory recycle bin enabled, what happens is that as you delete a user, it becomes a deleted user, a deleted items. And actually in Active Directory, now it doesn't show up in the organizational unit or the container where the user lived. It now shows up in the deleted items container. And from there, you can actually undelete it. You can actually restore it, but with all its group memberships, with all its attributes, with everything attached to it. Now, of course, there's a specific time period where you want to do that, and by default, it is the same as your Tombstone lifetime period. So if you have or still have the 60-day Tombstone lifetime period, you will also have a 60-day period in which you can actually undelete an item from the deleted items container. But after that period, we get into the same process with tombstoning. And after that tombstone lifetime period, again, the user is actually disabled deleted state in Active Directory, and you can't do anything about it anymore. So there's a couple of things that that happen with the Active Directory recycle bin. And for instance, one of the things is that as you enable it, you can't disable it afterwards. And that's because the entire Active Directory forest needs to obey the new rules so that you can straightforwardly undelete and restore objects, and not on one domain controller you can, or in one domain you can, and in the other one you can't anymore. The Active Directory recycle bin applies to users, to devices, to organizational units, to password policy protection, to password account policies and stuff like that. So let me just quickly show that, AZ, and it'll be my last demo before I hand it over to you. So I've got some, let me go to system again, the password settings container. I've got some password settings here. As I delete the password settings, what will happen is that, oh, I don't have sufficient. That's interesting. So let's look it up. It's got protect from accidental deletion enabled by default, which is interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. That's a good thing to show.
Yep. So that's why it's part of this demo. So I actually can't delete it then. Now I can. And let's delete it. I'm really sure. And then what will happen is it will show up in my deleted objects right there. And I can actually right click it and say restore or restore to. Now with a password container object, it's not really obvious that you want to restore it anywhere because it can't live anywhere except in that specific container. So here I can only do restore. But of course, a user or another organizational unit or a device, you can restore it to a different location. And as you can see, it's right back here, and it even has most things attached to it. So you can continue and do that. I don't think I clicked OK on the domain admins. Just let me see. Nope, I didn't click OK when I set it to domain admins. So it's been restored with all its settings. Now, AZ, let's go back to the slides. And I guess I need to hand it over to you and ask you to show the additional value.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, so with that in mind, let's switch to some other like third-party tools such as Veeam Backup and Replication, because this is one of the things that can help you to to provide the additional layer of protection over the standard tools, the default ones. And well, I have just a brief slide about Veeam. I'm very sure that you know us and you know who we are and what we do. But basically, with the company with around 15 years of data protection, we're focused on it. We strive to deliver the cloud data management these days, but then we haven't forgotten what we started from. And what we started from is the virtual machines and things that are really important for the day-to-day the operations for the backup administrators, including Active Directory. And if you ever was wondering about Veeam, we are simple, flexible, and reliable. Those are three major things that you should really think or remember about us. And with all the iterations that I'm going to show you, that it's like every one of them, it should be simple, flexible, and reliable. And if it's not that, then we're doing a pretty terrible job, and you should kind of let us know about it. Okay, so let's actually switch to data, well, to Active Directory data protection cycle. And then I wanted to quickly to show you an environment which is on the left side of the screen. The environment could consist of the virtual domain controllers, the physical domain controllers. It actually doesn't matter. What matters for us and for you, so to speak, should be to be able to do the backup of the data. And I'm talking about the whole Active Directory and the whole domain controller, or the bunch of them, to protect them. And so how you can do it is by installing the Veeam, either agent for Windows, which is really good for the physical domain controllers, or Veeam Backup and Replication, which actually has the Veeam agent for Windows built in, or it actually works for the virtual machines for vSphere and for Hyper-V. And what you have to do there, and I'm going to show you a couple of demos later on, you have to go there and you have to just enable one small but really important option, the application-aware processing. And once you do that, we take care of the data that is inside of the virtual machine, because we have the special logic to actually to detect the domain controller services and to be able to prepare it for a later recovery if that's going to happen. Once you have the backup of the domain controller, there is also another important thing you can do there. You can actually verify the recoverability of that backup. And for that, well, I'm going to have an additional slide, but then there is a certain functionality named Sure Backup. It allows you to create the isolated copy of the environment next to the actual environment, but at the same time not messing up with the production, and then to be able to check how your domain services or domain controllers would be running in an event of disaster recovery. And for the actual recovery, or for the granular object recovery, you can use the Veeam Explorer for Active Directory, which is also included into the Veeam Backup and Replication. And all of those I'm going to show you in just a couple of seconds. All right, so for the application-aware mesh processing, I was just briefly wanting to mention that, of course, we rely on VSS, and Active Directory is something that was developed by Microsoft itself. They have the VSS writers developed for the services. And so once we actually kind of get to domain controller, we talk to the VSS services, and we talk to the writers, and we tell them that, okay, it's time to flush all the data, and it's time to be in a consistent state. Because if you don't enable application-aware image processing, the backup of the domain controller will be crash consistent. And this is probably not something that you want to deal with later, because it might backfire. You don't want to see that. For the data labs, for the recoverability or verified recoverability, I wanted to show you the simple graphics, how you can actually imagine that system to work. So imagine, again, you have the virtual environment with a backup storage somewhere, and you have the backup file, compressed, deduped, all that. But then you actually need to check what is going to happen if you have the event of disaster recovery. And how you can do it? You can dedicate the part of your environment and create the isolated virtual lab there. We use the separate kind of network appliance, which is a tiny Linux VM, and then it does all the routing and going to actually isolate that virtual lab from the production environment. And so what then is going to happen is that if you enable the application group, which is the group of virtual machines that are interdependent of each other. Let me give you an example of the main controller and the SQL server and the Exchange server. and you know that you cannot just simply start the SQL server without the main services being in place. So for that, you would go to Veeam, you would enable the notion of application group, you would put all the interdependent VMs together, and then you will create a sure backup job, which will allow you to actually run all those VMs in automatic way and to check the VM itself, whether it could be booted up and be, the ping, the operating system that is running inside of VM, and the application itself. And in terms of the main controller, you have the options there to actually either to check the let's say 139 port, whether the services are started, or to inject the manual script and run some, I don't know, DS query. And so you would be sure that all that happened successfully. And then after that, you will receive the report that sure backup job ran fine and it successfully checked everything that you wanted it to check. Okay, this is for recoverability, for verified recoverability in automatic way. And then the Veeam Explorer for Active Directory. And I'm going in just a minute, I'm going to show you how it works. But then essentially it's an addition to the main software, to backup and replication. And it's specifically the tool to provide you with a simple view into the Active Directory, all the data that you have there. So you can compare it with the production, and this is basically that's a really good advantage of this specific tool. And then to recover anything that you want, to go and to be as granular as the individual object there. And then if you click on the advanced settings, you will be able to see the GPOs and the DNS records and the schema partitions, so all that. All right. Just wanted to briefly to tell you about the whole kind of event where you have, you have an issue with the Active Directory, and then you need to recover the domain controller. On the next slide, I'm going to show you what exactly could happen. But then let me bring you a couple of situations here. So if you have the multiple domain controllers environment, and then one of the DCs failed, so probably it's not a big deal and it happens kind of regularly. But then what you have to do is you have to rely on Veeam, because if you have the backup done with Veeam backup and application, we already kind of anticipated that issue. And by default, we're going to do the non-authoritative restore and automatically reboot the domain controller. Well, first of all, it's going to be booted into the RSM mode and then into the regular mode. And then it would be just receiving all the information from the other domain controllers in the domain there. Imagine the situation when actually everything failed and you are trying to rebuild the whole Active Directory services there, and so nothing has survived. But then you don't have to rebuild everything from the scratch, and obviously you wanted some data to be just recovered from the backup. And for that, obviously, well, you're not lucky, and I really hope that you are not going to deal with it. But then most likely what you'll have to do is you'll have to force the authoritative restore of one of the domain controllers. You have to read the knowledge base article, because it really depends on whether you're using the DFRS services or if you're still on FRS replication. And then depending on that, the recovery process would be different. On the next imaginary situation is that you have the corrupted Active Directory, and some data is corrupted, and so you don't have to recover everything. You don't have to recover multiple domain controllers, but you have to recover one and kind of render all the existing data obsolete. So for that, you would do the authoritative restore, and then you would actually force the domain controller by using the NTDS utility or something like that to actually to be the original source of the data and to replicate the data from this particular backup. Anyways, I guess what's really important about that is we have all those things documented. You can, I'm just having this slide here because I really wanted to have it, because we're going to share the slides and it would be much easier later on for you to click things and to see the instructions. But then we have the best practices for backup and recovery. We have the best practices for recovering the domain controllers, like I told you before, whether you're using different replication mechanisms. So you just click there and you see the appropriate situation, what happened to you, and you just follow the rules, because this is something that people have been asking us for ages. And then we have the, we did, well, Sander and another colleague of mine, Timothy, they did a really great deep dive into Active Directory a couple of years ago, and I checked it recently. I do not really think that it's obsolete. It's still valid. All the information that they provided, it's really great. I'm talking about the third item here. And then if you're concerned about the granular recovery of Active Directory objects, you can check my white paper, because I wrote it and I spent, well, definitely some time to cover all the nuances of recovering the particular objects there. All right, with that, let me briefly switch to my environment. Let me show you around, so you'd be familiar with Veeam Backup and Replication. So I'm running Veeam Backup and Replication here. This is one of the well, this is the flagship product of us, and it all starts with the notion of the, well, from backup job. So if I get the mouse here, that would be an interesting challenge. No, I didn't think I don't have it. But then, okay, I don't see it really, but then I can click somewhere. That's really interesting. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to, oh, there you go. I have the mouse back. So you go here and then you create the backup job. I'm just going to quickly show you what you should be really worried about. So for the virtual machines, on the second step, you have to include the domain controller, or basically all the environment. It really doesn't matter what exactly you're going to include here. But then the most interesting part, if you are concerned about Active Directory protection, it's this particular setting. I told you before about it. So you have to enable the application-aware processing. And there you go. You don't have to actually click on applications. You don't have to go like anywhere, because if you do, you can select your domain controller, and then it won't be anything interesting for you, probably, except the scripts part, where you can actually provide it with the PowerShell script to include it there. And so it would be automatically pushed from the backup server to the domain controller, and it would be executed there. And then after that, the backup would be done. But then beside of that, it doesn't actually require you to have any scripts whatsoever. You just enable application-aware processing, and there you go. So as long as you do that, you can then come to the backups that are on a disk, and then you can see my domain controller here. And so if I right-click on it and come to the restore of application items, I can already see that my Microsoft Active Directory objects are ready for me. So I can do the granular recovery for them. And then when I click finish, it will essentially bring me the Veeam Explorer for Microsoft Active Directory with my the Active Directory database automatically mounted here. If I did not enable the application-aware processing, it would not know about my database. But then regardless of that, I can just come here and edit manually, because I need to know the placement of the did file, and then I can just go there and edit manually. But then most likely I don't have to do it right now. So you can see by default, like I told you before, the users on computers and the GPOs, obviously. If you want to be really advanced, you can click on advanced features here, and to have also the integrated DNS records and the configuration partition schema. For the users and computers, let's actually click somewhere and let's see. I guess the most interesting part of it, especially if we have to compare it with the Active Directory recycle bin, is that you can actually compare it with the production. And so by clicking here, I'm just going to compare it with the production. Okay, it seems to be fine. But then I would really love it to show me just the changed objects. Okay, those are 2 objects. And I think I need to have more than that. So I'm just going to my domain controller and I'm going to delete someone, like this particular user. I don't like Aaron for some reason. Okay, so with that, I need to actually to refresh it. So it's going to check the current situation on my domain controller. And now you can see that Aaron is different these days. And so the item state is tombstone. I do not have the recycle bin enabled, so it was tombstoned automatically. So I can just view the attributes. I can see all the information there, even though part of it was stripped already. And then what's interesting about that is I can actually, well, let's compare the attributes. You see, the object has been tombstoned. And now probably I need to recover it back to the original location, or I can export it and to just read it if I have time. But then let's actually restore it back. All right, the restore summary is really easy. So it was successfully restored. All the, I can see all the information which is here about the users. And the most interesting part is that even the user's password was restored. So if I come back and if I just refresh, you should be able to see my, come back. Yeah, you should be able to see Aaron being back here. And so if the Aaron is that person that is coming to the office and just try to log in, but it was, his account was deleted for some reason and he could not log in properly. And so he was like panicking and, screaming all around. But then right now he should be able to just come back to his working environment and just log into the environment. So that's one of the, I would say, the benefits of having this solution in place. So users won't be, really giving you a hard time. Okay, with that, I know the Sander wanted me to emphasize here on the LDAP filter, but then we don't have that much time. But I'm just, well, it's here. Sander, if you have like a couple of words, you can say about that.
Yeah, so the LDAP filter is really, really strong. So I once had a project where I had to restore stuff as well. And actually, I wasn't even the one deleting it, not even one of my project team lead, but or members, but that's okay. And what I needed was to restore everybody, but not people that were no longer visible in the global address list in Exchange Server. And this is actually an attribute in Active Directory. And through the LDAP filter, we were actually able to filter out those accounts so that we didn't have to restore them. Really, really useful at that time. And I think that there's many more scenarios where you'd actually want to use that filter.
Definitely. But then, like I said before, don't have that much time to actually to show it around. So I'm going to close the Explorer for Active Directory. And the last thing I'm going to show is that, remember I was saying the things about the application group and the ability to check the recoverability of things. And so this is the place in backup infrastructure. This is the sure backup to check the recoverability of data. And the application group is something that, again, I mentioned a couple of interdependent VMs. And for one of them, for the domain controller, you can just click on edit. And yeah, this is really important here because you can manually select the role of the particular virtual machine, whether it's a DNS server or a domain controller or a global catalog server. You can just select it here. So what happens after is that we are going to check all the services. Once this particular VM will be booted up in an isolated environment, we're going to automatically check those services if they're running fine. So with that, you will be sure that in case of disaster, you'll have the valid copy of the data of the domain controller. And so whenever you need to actually recover it, you will be able to. Okay, and again, not really much of time right now. Let me actually, I think I can conclude the demo for now, and we can take the questions, because we have a couple of questions and I would love them to be answered. Sander, what about you?
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
So obviously, because Active Directory is so straightforward, the two most important questions that we got were on Veeam. So one of the things is the licensing of Sure Backup and Data Labs.
Okay, if we're talking about the Sure Backup and the Data Labs, those are the kind of the perks that are coming with the Enterprise and Enterprise Plus version. But then essentially you'll need the Enterprise to the Enterprise edition of Veeam Backup and Replication to have it in place. If we're talking about the Explorer for Active Directory, it's even included into the free version, which is not free anymore. We call it Community Edition version. And this is basically the standard functionality right now. So with that, you have all the options except recovering back to the original allocation. So for that, you could already recover things granularly, different objects, and then kind of use it as a, I don't know, like temporary staged recovery. But then if you need the convenience of the recovery to original place, you would go with the Enterprise or Enterprise Plus version. And if we're talking about the instance licensing, that is, well, it's not instance, it's universal license for a moment. The kind of new concept that we have at Veeam. It also comes with the Enterprise Plus edition. So if you're just starting with it, you will have all the perks that you need. All right. Anything else, Sander?
Yes. So one of the other things is a question that someone has about replication.
Oh.
Replication jobs, and I don't have much experience with those because that feature is not available on Hyper-V, but well, from Veeam. But if you, I'm really glad that you specifically tell people to check the application web processing box. So the question is, of course, we have to enable that checkbox when we backup domain controllers. Do we also have to check that box if we replicate servers?
Yes, so the backup and replication mechanisms, they share the same logic. And then if you replicated the main controller, then yes, just enable the application-aware processing. So we are going to prepare I guess this is the most important part. We're going to prepare the main controller, well, the data being in a backup. So for the potential recovery, so next time the data would be, the main controller would be recovered from the backup file, it will already know that, okay, there was the backup that happened with it, and so it should not, it should behave properly. So this is one of the good things about the application-aware processing itself. So we are preparing the domain controllers for the potential recovery. And yeah, for both, for backups and replicas also.
All right. And the other one that the other question that really stands out is Veeam available for cloud infrastructure?
Well, yeah, it's interesting one. I mean,
I think the wording is interesting. Yes. So let's dive into that. So what is cloud infrastructure? If we're talking about domain controllers that are running as virtual machines in Microsoft Azure or Amazon's AWS, then I guess the answer is yes, but because you can use the Veeam agent for that.
Yeah, well, you can use Veeam agent, or you can use the newly released the backup for AWS and soon to be released backup for Azure, respectively. But then I'm really curious about the question and whether we, interpreted it properly, because it might be something else.
So the other way that the question could have been asked is, so can I use Veeam to back up to cloud storage? for instance?
Well, the answer is yes. With the newest versions for a couple of years already, we have the Cloud Connect program to support all the partners of Veeam, participants of Veeam Cloud and Service Provider program, and also the object storages, the public ones being AWS S3 or Azure Blob or IBM Object Storage or S3 compatible storages. Then yeah, you can bring the data there. In case something happened with your physical infrastructure, you can bring it back from the cloud to run everything back.
Yep. So another question that we just received was, why is there no Windows Server 2019 first functional level in an Active Directory?
I would
So
love
yes,
you to take that one.
yes, we don't just get Veeam questions, we also get Active Directory
Yeah.
questions. Yeah, perfect. So Microsoft has wanted to do away with domain first functional levels because they are a pain to many Active Directory admins. So whenever they release new features in Active Directory, they always try to not make it something that is dependent on a forest function level or a domain function level. And to say politically, is that there are no new features in Active Directory in Windows Server 2019 that require the domain function level or the forest function level. The other way of saying it is shorter, and it says there are no new features in Active Directory in Windows Server 2019, which is also, at least for the largest part, true. There are some things that have changed underwater, but there's not a lot of changes in Windows Server 2019. Of course, that's just one of the ways that a domain function level or forest function level is actually used. The other way is that it helps admins to prevent other admins to introduce domain controllers with a lower Windows Server version. But as there are no new features, it doesn't really matter if your domain controllers run Windows Server 2016 or Windows Server 2019.
I guess to conclude that, it would be that Microsoft finally decided to give us a good time and not to learn a lot of new things related to Active Directory. And so if we know the best practices for, I don't know, for 2016 or 2012, it would be still the same. It would be still the case, probably like that. And with that information, I know we're at the top of the hour and people are busy these days. So thank you very much, everyone, for the coming. And like I said before, all the recordings and slides are going to be distributed to you later on. And again, we wish you a really nice day. And thank you for watching us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.